Hi everyone, my name is Taylor. I work in marketing here at Random House, and today I'm going to be joined by one of our special colleagues for the Inside the House routine. While we wait for Elizabeth to join us, I'm going to quickly pin a comment to the top here, and then we'll get started. Let's see if that will pin. There we go. And while we wait for Elizabeth to join, I'll just give her a quick introduction here. She is a vice president and executive editor at One World Books. Let's see if we have Elizabeth yet. Again, feel free to start asking your questions that you want to know about her job, and hopefully we'll get to some of those along the way. Hello,
Hi there.
how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. To get us started, do you want to tell some of our guests tuning in a little bit about your job at Random House in One World?
Sure. My name is Elizabeth Méndez Berry, and I'm the vice president and executive editor at One World. And my job is basically looking for books, eating books, sleeping books, thinking about books all the time, and then also thinking about how books reach communities.
Yeah, books 24/7. It's
There
a
you
nice
go.
life. um, and you're somewhat new to publishing. I believe you have a background in social justice philanthropy and some writing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about one, how you came to publishing, but also some of that other experience that you've had?
Sure, sure. Yeah. So I have had a very crooked path to publishing, and I'm delighted to talk about it. I so I think yeah, crooked path is probably the right way of putting it. I most recently worked in social justice philanthropy. I worked for a foundation called the Nathan Cummings Foundation, and while I was there, it's mission driven work, and basically the goal is to think about what is the cultural scaffolding that we need for democracy, that we need for our collective imaginations to envision a more just future and things like that. And in that work, I had the opportunity to work all over the country, funding in Alaska, funding in New Mexico, all kinds of stuff. And it was really one of the treasures of my life, I think, having the opportunity to support such talented people and to get to know wonderful leaders on the philanthropic side, and also to really think about how wealth collides with movements and some of the complicated aspects of that, and that have been interrogated as well within philanthropy and outside of it. So it was a great experience. And I started in philanthropy after being a journalist and cultural critic. And basically, I started working at the Ford Foundation to subsidize my very expensive journalism habit.
Yeah, amazing. Well, we're so glad that your career did lead you to publishing at One World. And can you tell us what drew you to publishing and that on that journey, and why One World Books, which is an amazing imprint of the Random House Group?
Yeah, I'm so grateful to have landed at One World. And it was also a big surprise to me because it definitely, as I said, I've had a crooked path and I did not envision being here now. So when I was in my last role in philanthropy at the Nathan Cummings Foundation, I was able to do a number of projects that were really sort of about the connective tissue between, voice or arts or culture and politics, or um, a number of different issues connecting. And I did some work on digital security. And then I also did work on criticism, on cultural criticism. And one of the big questions that we were asking in that work, it's a project called Critical Minded. And it was about how the discourse that we tend to have about culture doesn't always
Mhm.
reflect the people who are creating it. And so, for example, we wrote about the Whitney's Museum's big biennial a year ago. And I believe all of the initial critics, or most of the initial critics, were white men, many of whom were in their 70s. And so basically, we were making the case that we needed to rethink how criticism works, right? And whose voice is defining the
Mhm.
conversation. And so, as part of that, I reached out to my old friend Chris Jackson, who I've known for a very long time, since, I don't know, maybe 15 years actually. He's obviously dating me. I'm green to this industry, but I am gray. And we just had a conversation about the impact of criticism on literature, on writers. And it was a great conversation. And sort of after that, he came back to me and he said, I know this sounds crazy, but would you be interested in coming to work at One World? And I was definitely very surprised because I kind of thought we were talking about something else, but it didn't wind up gelling at that moment, but we stayed in conversation and just thinking about what it might look like for us to collaborate in some capacity, either at One World or through NCF or Critical Minded. And then one day, maybe about a year ago, he showed up and said, I think I have it. And I said, really? So here we are.
Amazing. Well, I like what you said too about kind of how a lot, you said, media critics, but I think the larger entertainment space is sort of having this reckoning about the stories that we tell, and the people that we value to tell those stories. I think, One World does an incredible job of really lifting up a lot of voices that publishing has not traditionally focused on. I'd love to hear about, as someone who maybe did not grow up in the publishing industry, what kind of changes you would like to see, or what does your better version of or vision of publishing look like? It's a bit of a
So,
loaded question.
yeah, man, I just got here and I have a lot of um, so, I literally started in publishing just a month before the pandemic started. And so I think a lot of the um, experiences that you have where you get to sort of orient yourself, I haven't exactly had.
Mm-hmm.
So I want anybody who's listening to take whatever I say with a grain of salt. But I think, fundamentally, we're in probably certainly the most challenging political context I've lived through in this country. And it's a political context that is explicitly taking aim at, you know, ideas, right? And it's taking aim at, the 1619 Project. We're working on the book at One World. And, that is front and center of this president's uh, target practice basically right now. And so I think that obviously, the publishing industry is a money-making entity. But I also think that ignoring the political realities that we're facing, we do so at our peril, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
personally believe that until the publishing industry meaningfully reflects the full mosaic,
Mm-hmm.
of American identities in all of their glory, um, it will be enforcing some of the dynamics that have enabled this president to come to power. And
Yeah.
so for me coming in, I know that there are extremely few Latinas in publishing. The numbers have come, have been pretty clear. And I personally see it as my responsibility to play a role in ensuring that not just my community, but every community gets represented in a way that is not just, not that is consistent with the complexity of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a big part of it. I'm also really interested in the economics and how people actually get compensated in a way that is representative of their role. And so entry level, that those are things that are definitely of concern to me. And then I would say, just again in this political context, what does an industry do, when the sitting president is explicitly coming after the ideas and
Right.
coming after the authors?
Definitely. So for those of you who are just tuning in, this is Random House live with Elizabeth Méndez Berry, who is an executive editor at One World Books, and we are talking about our Inside the House routine. I want to come back to some of that conversation that we were just having, but to give kind of a little bit of break for our conversation, can you tell us about some of your favorite writers or books that have inspired you?
Absolutely, I would be delighted.
An easy question.
Yeah, that's my favorite softball. So I want to just say that I'm a big nerd, and I've been reading my whole life, and I love to read all kinds of things. And I've also, I came up I worked for Vibe magazine, which was really influential for me. So it's not just about book authors necessarily. Was very much influenced by hip hop critics, including people like Greg Tate, Joan Morgan, Dream Hampton, all of those people, Jeff Chang. I wanted to particularly shout out Lisa Jones, now Lisa Jones Brown, I believe, Bulletproof Diva. That's a beautiful book. The poet Pedro Pietri. And I think, it's been, I probably have some, fancy books and not so fancy books, but another author that has been really important to me is Alma Guillermo Prieto. This book is called Looking for History. There's another book of hers that I've given to anybody pretty much that I know, which is called, yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't remember. I'll figure it out. But she's fantastic. And then just another fave. This is the graphic novelist Jaime Hernandez, Wigwam Bam. So these are a few of my all-time faves.
Amazing. Thank you for those wonderful recommendations.
Sure.
And then are there any projects that Warn World is working on right now that you're particularly excited about?
Well, I mean, the 1619 project, I just, I think one of the big things that means the world to me right now is just being able to eavesdrop on the development of that project because it is so powerful and so important. And just thinking about how it's lived in the world and how it's become so mobilizing for so many people, and then also how it's become mobilizing in the opposite direction and the complexity of that. So just that I think is a big one. Carla Cornejo Villavicencio's book, The Undocumented Americans, which just, was on the long list. That
Yes,
book, yeah, that book, I just it electrifies me. She's such a fantastic writer, and I think she does the thing which is to say, I can flex on you from a craft perspective,
definitely.
and I can also flex on you from a reporting and content perspective. And I think there's sort of this expectation that somebody who's writing about the topic she's focused on will be sort of dour and sort of earnest and serious. And she's like, I'm serious about what I'm doing, but
Yeah.
I'm not occupying the conventional voice in that enterprise.
I actually listened to that one as an audiobook, which was an incredible listening experience. And
Oh,
I believe she narrated it, and hearing it in her own words and her
yeah.
own voice was just a remarkable experience. And I'm so happy that the book is longlisted for the National Book Awards. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. I can take no credit for anything involving that book, but again, I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Again, for those of you tuning in, this is Random House Live with Elizabeth Méndez Berry talking about our Inside the House routine. Um, so earlier we were talking about kind of what you feel like your responsibility as a Latina woman in this white dominated industry is. And you also wrote this incredible New York Times article about the culture wars and kind of how Latinos can kind of win back some of their culture in this country that is largely marginalized. If you wanted to share anything else about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that to me, one of the really important building blocks for political power and social power and economic power is storytelling power. And so I see, it's not an accident that I took this job, even though my path here was crooked, as I've said. Um, I took this job because I believe that writers are sort of, and writing and what they produce is at the core of how we transform, how we're understood, and how we understand one another, right? I mean, you hold books in your body, right, and your mind in a way that you don't necessarily hold a TV show, even though TV shows can be really important as well. And one of the things that I found when I was that article is kind of an encapsulation of a series of experiences that I had as a journalism funder, as an arts funder, as, like an eavesdropper in Hollywood and all these different situations. And one of the things that I kept hearing, particularly in Hollywood, was that people just couldn't find Latino stories, Latinx stories. They couldn't find them anywhere. And I was like, well, what do you mean? They look for intellectual property, and the way that intellectual property is defined and works is as sort of short stories, novels, and articles. And Latinx people have been shut out of a lot of those spaces, or are severely underrepresented, let's say, in a lot of those spaces.
Right.
And so, as somebody who myself is a writer who has palled around with a lot of writers over time, I know, the power and the potential of that work to to create a cascade of impacts. And I think when you look at Carla's book and the degree to which, you know, it has resonated with undocumented people, it's fascinating that it's now received this national, really important and exciting national recognition. But we did a little book club with her and with the book, and just the number of undocumented people who came on and said, I've never felt myself represented in this way. It just gave me goosebumps. And it said to me, what Carla's doing is not just representation, right? It is riveting. It's and
Yeah.
I think the project from my perspective is to create room for more of that to happen, and for all of the multiplicity of stories, for, you know, Garifuna stories, for Guatemalans, you know, for
Yeah.
Central American stories, for Argentine stories, for white Latino stories, for but particularly for Afro Latino and indigenous
Hmm.
stories, because those are the ones that we have least seen.
Right. And there's something so profound about that moment when you're reading a book and you see yourself mirrored in its pages. And we certainly have a lot more audiences to be catering to in the future for sure. So that's really wonderful to hear. Um,
Thank you.
yeah. So we're almost out of time here. I'm going to see if we have any questions popping up. We have so many questions. It's amazing. The gist of most of them is kind of what do you look for when evaluating a project for submission?
So that's a great question. What do I look for? I mean, I think I'm looking for a mix of things, and I should be clear that I'm not just looking for Latinx voices. I'm looking for a range, even though that, you know, that is part of my secret, not so secret agenda. I think I'm looking for a freshness of ideas. If it's, you know, reported, I'm looking for a density of reporting. I was an investigative reporter. I've been a critic. I've done a lot of different types of journalistic work. And so when I look at kind of journalistic submissions, it's through that lens. And I would say, you know, and fresh voice flexing, basically. Like I want to see people with a degree of confidence and enthusiasm. And one thing I'm not looking for, that I've actually really has been interesting for me and I'm struggling with a little bit in this role, is that it appears to me that so many of the submissions I'm receiving are coming with the same credentials. Like they're coming with, oh, I've published in such and such magazine, or I've had a TED talk or whatever. That stuff
The
doesn't matter.
FA.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that. And I really, my agenda, my other secret agenda is to try and, you know, bring people who haven't necessarily been endorsed by those gatekeepers to to look at their work and to
Right.
consider it and to take it seriously.
Amazing. Well, I cannot wait to see what you come up with. I'm so looking forward to reading some of your projects down the road. And that is a bit, well, I guess we can fit in one more question. I have another minute here.
Sure.
But if you have any advice for aspiring writers or editors or philanthropists, any just kind of general words of wisdom to share?
Absolutely. So I was thinking about this because I thought that this might be a question. So one thing for writers, I would say is, if you can find a community, and whatever that means for you, a squad, you know, a group of people who believe in your voice, believe in your vision, and also will not let you submit a weak sentence, keep those people close and work with them regularly and edit their work and have them edit your work. Because I think one of the things that I keep coming up against is that people will encounter one editor who may just have a different taste, or it may not be nice or whatever, and that one editor becomes the definer of how that person feels about their work. So I really want to encourage you all to build your own communities of people who are in kind of a shared enterprise together and who are looking to see each other succeed. And then for editors, I would say, let's be curious. I mean, I guess, you know, I have so much to learn as an editor in books. And so I would love to be in conversation with more editors. And I'm trying to do that, especially look forward to doing that when we're back in a building. But right now, I think the big thing for me is I'm just trying to understand what are those different gatekeepers and barriers to entry, and I'm observing them because I think I'm new to it. I'm like, oh wow, one publication appears to control all of my submissions. That makes me uncomfortable. You know, I want to
Right.
understand what are the different ways that people can come in. And so I think understanding different pathways to submission seems really, really important to me, and something that I really want to learn as well.
Definitely. Well, that is our time for today. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to having something to talk about with you when I actually publish
Yes,
something.
eventually.
One of the, I mean, it's gonna be a while.
Amazing. And thanks
Thank
to everyone
you.
who tuned in today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, everybody. Love to my fam out there. Bye.
Bye.